Well, as Michigan's largest county certifies its election results, there is a bitter legal fight still underway over the results in Pennsylvania. I'm joined now by Mark Aronchik. He's the attorney for several of Pennsylvania's county election boards, and he went head-to-head with Rudy Giuliani, the Trump campaign's new lawyer in that case, in court yesterday. Mark, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right, we spoke yesterday. You told me that Rudy Giuliani was outrageous in his claims, but notably this, that many of his claims in court were not actually related, you said, to the actual complaints. So tell us how it played out yesterday, what argument he made and how you responded.
Yeah, hey, Jim, this was one of the strangest court appearances I've ever had. We were there to deal with a complaint. And the complaint that the Trump campaign filed was that the Philadelphia and other county election administrators were doing some things that they didn't think were right in the administration of the mail-in voting. The complaint had nothing about fraud, nothing about gigantic conspiracies. But in walked Mr. Giuliani, and he talked only about fraud, gigantic conspiracies, the kinds of things that we heard at the driveway of the Total Landscaping press conference. But it bore no relationship to what we were actually sitting there doing in court. And so I listened for a while, and I realized that I had to do two things. One was to deal with rather outrageous statements that he was making throughout his presentation. And the other was then to focus the court on what we were really there for. Because when you look at the complaint and what was really involved in this case, it was a bunch of small ball complaints that various administrators didn't do some things correctly.
Yeah.
When we think the administrators were doing the very best they could to run a fair and honest election.
Now, in the midst of that, Giuliani made some remarkable claims. I mean, he accused Philadelphia election workers of being a little mafia group. I mean, can you make accusations like that in a court of law without basis?
No, you really can't. And I wasn't going to sit there and let that go. I represent the government and all the aspects that are making these elections work right for all Americans, and particularly for Pennsylvanians. And these are patriots. These are public servants. These are people who, in the middle of a pandemic, went out there day after day and sometimes all night trying to get this election moving and right for the American people. An election that had the biggest turnout in Pennsylvania's history and probably in the United States history. And so to sit there and see these sideswipes and these outrageous accusations of a little mafia, gigantic conspiracies among all the big cities. He'll show this conspiracy if he only has another chance to amend his complaint, and he can start again and have a hearing. He was living in his own fantasy, but he wasn't living in the reality of this court case. That's how I saw it.
Now, reality did eventually intervene, did it not? Because you say that Giuliani eventually conceded that the case wasn't about fraud or widespread fraud. How exactly did he make that concession?
Well, here's the greatness of our independent judicial system, and I hope all Americans see it. You can say all kinds of things on Twitter and in parking lot driveways and the like, but when you go into an American courtroom, you have to have evidence, facts. You have to make legal arguments that are appropriate. And when all was said and done, the judge, who's a very good judge, just asked, you keep talking about fraud, but I don't see this in the complaint. And eventually, Mr. Giuliani said, you're right. We don't have fraud in the complaint. We're not talking about fraud. And I've seen this now several times, where the campaign comes in with big accusations about fraud and then retreats under pressure from judges to explain themselves and tell the American public what they're talking about.
So where does that leave big picture? And I know you're party just to the case in Pennsylvania, but you have enormous experience in these kinds of cases. Where does that leave this legal challenge that the president is still talking and tweeting about this morning?
Well, let me just give a word about Pennsylvania, because in the middle of yesterday's federal court hearing, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in another case of mine, issued a very important ruling saying that all these accusations about whether observers of the campaign had meaningful access to watch the counting and watch the administration of the mail-in ballots, the Supreme Court said, yes, they did. Under the law, they, as well as all campaigns, had access. They were observers in the way that the election code expects. And so in the middle of the argument in federal court about these broad, wild accusations, our Pennsylvania Supreme Court reaffirmed another principle that tells us all that this election was run very well, with all of the challenges, with all of the pandemic issues and the mail-in system. It was run very well. And so I'm not going to get ahead of where the judge yesterday is. I will never do that, but I hope that we prevail. I think we will prevail. And I just think these cases and these accusations are going to run their course. Yeah. And we're going to get on with what we should be involved in, and that is certifying these elections and then moving on.
Well, listen, facts matter in court. Mark Aronchik, we appreciate your view from the inside.
Well, I thank you very much.
Former acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney took Giuliani to task for his approach in the courtroom. He said, and I quote, "I am still a little concerned about the use of Rudy Giuliani. It strikes me that this is the most important lawsuit in the history of the country, and they are not using the most well-noted election lawyers. This is not a television program," he added. He is right. Giuliani is messing up Trump's already messed up lawsuits even further. He did not even know what is in the lawsuit that he appeared for, pleading the court to accept things that were already dropped from the lawsuit. He started with sweeping arguments saying that there is widespread fraud, Democratic-run cities are colluding, blah, 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 blah. And after hours of back and forth, he ended up admitting that this is not a fraud case. Because the problem is, you can literally tweet whatever the heck you want. You can say whatever the hell you want in the campaign rally. But if you try to do the same inside the courtroom, you will end up in an orange jumpsuit. The Trump world is trying as hard as it can to keep the real world completely disconnected from what is going on inside the courtrooms. So many cases, and not a single one has turned into a winner for Trump. The clock is ticking for the Trump campaign as the states will start to certify the results. Georgia is scheduled for later this week. Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona will be certified next week, and Wisconsin will be done on December 1. These are the only 6 states that the Trump campaign is after, and they will all have a winner in less than 12 days. And Trump campaign lawsuits are now handled by Giuliani. It is being reported that Giuliani is charging the Trump campaign $20,000 per day. For what it's worth, I think it's a perfect combination. The Trump campaign is raising money saying that it's for the recount, but in reality, more than half the money they are collecting goes into Trump's official election defense fund, and once money goes into that fund, it cannot be diverted for recount expenses. So they are taking money through dubious methods, and Giuliani is milking them, a match made in heaven. If you have watched this far, I hope you like the content. If you can subscribe to the channel, it will be of great help for the channel to gain some traction. Thank you.